Pursuant to House Resolution 738 and House Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 4078. Will the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Simpson, kindly take the chair?
The House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 4078, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to provide that no agency may take any significant regulatory action until the unemployment rate is equal to or less than 6.0%.
When the Committee of the Whole rose on Wednesday, July 25, 2012, a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 25, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey, had been postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in Part B of House Report 112-616, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment Number 6 by Mr. Watt of North Carolina, Amendment Number 7 by Mr. Losack of Iowa, Amendment Number 8 by Mrs. Richardson of California, Amendment Number 9 by Mrs. Richardson of California, Amendment Number 10 by Mr. Conley of Virginia, Amendment Number 11 by Mr. Posey of Florida, Amendment Number 12 by Mr. Nadler of New York, Amendment Number 13 by Mr. McKinley of West Virginia, Amendment Number 15 by Mr. George Miller of California, Amendment Number 16 by Ms. Woolsey of California, Amendment Number 18 by Ms. Waters of California, Amendment Number 19 by Mr. Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, Amendment Number 20 by Mr. Posey of Florida, Amendment Number 21 by Ms. Maloney of New York, Amendment Number 25 by Mr. Posey of Florida. The Chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 6, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Watt, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 6, printed in Part B of House Report Number 112-616, offered by Mr. Watt of North Carolina.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
As you heard, there are a long lineup of amendment votes, 15 amendment votes to a bill that would prevent federal regulations from being issued costing more than $100 million for a period of 2 years or until the unemployment rate drops to 6%. This first amendment vote, 15 minutes, and all of the following amendment votes will be 2-minute votes. This is Mel Watt's amendment, which would deal with the regulations issued by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. 15-minute vote. But before they got to this morning, they had a procedural hurdle they had to surmount, one of which was a typographical error in the bill itself discovered yesterday. So the Rules Committee had to meet late yesterday to fix that, changing the word employment to unemployment in the bill itself. When the new rule came out this morning, or was debated this morning, they had the wrong number on the rule, and so they took care of that, and they've now moved on to votes on the amendments, as you heard. 15-minute vote on the House floor. But as we watch this vote, we're going to show you some of that debate from this morning over the typographical errors in the bill.
By direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 741 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 152, House Resolution 741, resolved that during further consideration of the bill, H.R. 4078, to provide that no agency may take any significant regulatory action until the unemployment rate is equal to or less than 6.0%, as amended pursuant to House Resolution 783, the further amendment printed in Section 2 of this resolution shall be considered as adopted in the House and in the Committee of the Whole. Section 2, the amendment referred to in the first section of this resolution is as follows. In Section 102B, strike employment and insert unemployment.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be amended by the amendment I have placed at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mrs. Fox of North Carolina. Strike all after the resolving clause and insert the following. That during further consideration of the bill, H.R. 4078, to provide that no agency may take any significant regulatory action until the unemployment rate is equal to or less than 6.0%, as amended pursuant to House Resolution 738. The further amendment printed in Section 2 of this resolution shall be considered as adopted in the House and in the Committee of the Whole. Section 2, the amendment referred to in the first section of this resolution is as follows. In Section 102B, strike employment and insert unemployment.
Is there an objection?
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the right to object.
The gentleman is recognized on his objection.
Mr. Speaker, I think we should have an explanation here. The clerk read the technical language, but as I understand it, what happened was that the bill that we were voting on yesterday and we'll vote on today has an error and gets employment and unemployment confused. And this is a bill that would correct the error in the bill that we debated yesterday. So I wonder, why do we now need a unanimous consent? Are we correcting the correction? It's the old Latin phrase, quis custodiet ipsos custodes, who guards the guardians? I guess today the question is, who corrects the correctors? So I would ask, I would yield to the gentlewoman from North Carolina if she would explain why we had to get a bill to make a correction and now we have to have a unanimous consent apparently to correct the correction. What is the error? I guess I should say, what's the error of the day? We know what yesterday's error was. What's today's error? I'll yield to the gentlewoman.
Mr. Speaker, if I might respond to the gentleman from Massachusetts. And I appreciate his asking the question because it gives us an opportunity to do a mea culpa. That's my ability to quote Latin this morning in response to the gentleman from Massachusetts. Yes, there was a very minor error in the rule that was passed day before yesterday, and that was that two letters, the letters U, the letter N, were left off of one word in
the gentlewoman, I would take back my time briefly to say, if that's the case, if the letters U and N were left out, knowing the animosity on that side to UN, I can understand why psychologically that would have happened. I yield again to the gentlewoman.
Then in preparing the correction for that, inadvertently two numbers were reversed in the number for the resolution. So I don't have a quote from Murphy's Law, a Latin quote from Murphy's Law, but I will say that it appears as though in the attempt to make one correction, unfortunately, another mistake was made. It is pure, they were both purely clerical errors, no nefarious intent made, and we would like to move on in as expeditious a fashion as we possibly can, because we know our colleagues and we are looking forward to a weekend of work at home, and we'd like to move along and get this accomplished so we can get to the important work, the underlying bill.
Mr. Speaker, proceeding on my reservation, I appreciate the gentlewoman's mea culpa. She wasn't here at the time. I would note that it is my predecessor, the late Reverend Robert Drinan, S.J., who was better than I at responding to mea culpas, so I won't be able wholly to deal with that. But I do think this is more than simply a double error. It's a matter of haste, and it is relevant because, and I would just take exception to the gentleman saying, well, it's important that we get this done right away. I think, frankly, the problem has been that in these past couple of years, and to some extent before, we haven't met frequently enough. I understand people would like to get back to the districts they represent, but I think that this is emblematic of our not having enough time to deal with things. Look, we are going to be voting, I think, on 20-something amendments today. Important amendments in an important bill that were debated for 10 minutes each. late into yesterday evening. No proper airing of very controversial subjects. And indeed, I think this is what happens when you try to do too much too soon. People on the other side were critical of some of the legislation we passed. Financial reform bill, they said it was too encompassing. But it went through a much more thorough process than this very controversial, even more comprehensive bill we're dealing with today. This is a bill that we're dealing with today that deals with every single subject that comes before this Congress, because it would put severe restrictions on the adoption of regulations about financial reform, about health, about the environment, about occupational safety, about transportation safety. And yeah, it is a problem when you try to do too much too soon. So I understand that I do not impute any nefarious intent. Let me say, under the House rules, you can't impute nefarious intent even if you think there is some, and I don't think there is any. So for two reasons, I don't impute that. But it does seem to me this is an example and a chance for us, frankly, to talk about a flawed legislative process. We're doing this bill, which is kind of a big message bill, and I know there's a lot of criticism on the other side of the United States Senate, but the Senate passed an agricultural bill. This House isn't even going to take one up, a very important agricultural bill. The Senate passed a transportation bill. This House had to go along with a conference without any chance to deliberate on it. The Senate passed a postal reform bill to keep the Postal Service going, and this House can't take it up. So when we can't do the basic legislation that we should do, and we do one of these broad message bills that's overly comprehensive, and then we make mistakes, I think it's worth some notice. And I will now yield to my colleague from New Jersey.
If I could speak on the gentleman's reservation, I thank the gentleman, thank the gentlelady. Obviously, there's no nefarious intent. There's no question about that. I would like the House to understand where we are procedurally. It's my understanding that the House yesterday spent the better part of the day debating a bill which said that regulation should not take effect until unemployment hits 94%. Is that the gentleman's understanding?
Apparently that was what was in the bill because, and they said it was a typo that the words, the letters U and N were left out. I will have to say there's certain equality here. The day before yesterday the mistake was letters, today it's numbers. I suppose tomorrow it'll be astrological signs.
And reclaiming, I would assume that flows from the fact that people didn't read the bill, because we debated yesterday the most part of the day on a bill that erroneously said regulations can't take effect until unemployment hits 94%. The intention evidently was until employment hits 94%. Then it's my understanding we find ourselves at the present moment in a situation where the correcting rule that would have fixed the word unemployment to be employment itself has an error in it, that it refers to another bill by reference. I would yield to the gentlelady. Is that correct?
No, it's my time. If the gentleman wants me to yield, I will yield. But first I would note that the error was in the first substantive page. This was not buried somewhere deeply. So just to reinforce the point that a lot of people didn't read the bill, that error was very much in the
gentleman would yield that my understanding was in the fourth paragraph of the bill.
First substantive one. And if the gentleman wants me to, I would yield to the gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, we are all human beings. How ironic it is that our colleagues were here just a few minutes ago on the floor discussing the tragedy in Aurora, Colorado. And that was as great an example of what great human beings and how bipartisan we can be in this chamber. It's as great a bipartisan effort as I've seen in a long time. We know what to do as caring human beings, what to say in such situations. And it's such a great example of how this body can operate. That group was given 40 minutes to talk about a great tragedy. Now we're engaging in a gotcha situation over an insignificant issue for which we take the responsibility. And I'm frankly embarrassed that the tenor of the conversation is going in this direction after the wonderful bipartisan effort we just saw on this floor. A mistake was made, and then in attempting to correct the mistake, an extraordinarily minor other mistake was made. I would appeal to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to say, we are human beings. We know how to forgive mistakes. Neither of these mistakes was made by a member. We're quite willing to overlook mistakes like this in the past. And I think in the spirit of comedy, in the spirit that was established on this floor this morning, we should move on, get to the work that the American people sent us here for, and understand, as was quoted this morning by one of our colleagues, our time is very precious. Don't waste it by playing gotcha games.
Well, I will take that.
Think about what we discussed earlier. Mr. Polis and I will debate this rule, and we'll do it in a spirit of comedy, and that's the way I think we should be operating. Yes, we made a mistake. Yes, a second mistake was made. We acknowledge that. We accept it. Now we'd like to get on to the people's business.
First, as regards to tragedy, of course we all come together. But the fact that we can celebrate tragedy does not mean that we put aside in a democratic body our legitimate differences. And this is not simply a small mistake, but it is a small mistake in a bill that is about as partisan as it gets. To make a plea for bipartisanship with this excessively partisan bill that is being put through in such a procedurally inappropriate fashion, with major concerns about every aspect of the federal government given 10 minutes of debate at 9 and 10 o'clock at night to be voted on 20 at once. No, that's a mistake. Secondly, as the gentleman from New Jersey and I pointed out, and it is not simply that a mistake was made, but it's a mistake that would easily have been caught early if people had read the bill. And I stress this because when we did some of the other legislation, financial reform, health care, there was constant repetition of the argument on the Republican side. You haven't read the bill, nobody's read the bill. Well, you haven't read this bill, apparently, Mr. Speaker, at least not very many people. And blaming the staff, I never like to do that, because the staff prepares things, but the members sign off on it. So, yeah, we're going to proceed to this debate, but we are talking here about an indication that an overly broad bill, given too little time for consideration.
The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 7, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Losack, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 7, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Mr. Losack of Iowa.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen. Recorded vote is ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
The House will move quickly through this series of 14 amendment votes here. An amendment to the bill, again, which would curb federal regulations until the unemployment rate drops to 6% or less. Dave Losack of Iowa has an amendment that would exempt regulations designed to lower fuel prices from the restrictions imposed by the bill.
Any member wish to change their vote? Vote the ayes are 177, the nays are 238, less than majority voting in affirmative. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 8 printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Richardson, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevail by voice vote. Clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 8, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Ms. Richardson of California.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen. Recorded vote is ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Many of these amendments would propose exemptions to the federal regulations bill. This one by Laura Richardson of California would exempt regulations and rules proposed to implement the health care overhaul. Again, another 2-minute vote. The Senate is in today after yesterday passing the Democratic proposal that would extend the Bush-era tax cuts for incomes up to $250,000 and raise the top rate on capital gains and dividends. Today, the Senate resumes consideration on the motion to proceed to cybersecurity legislation. Tim Starks of Congressional Quarterly reporting this morning that a group of senators met this morning to discuss cybersecurity, but departed without resolving some of the key sticking points. Republican John Kyle said he would back a procedural vote on the bill, which could come as soon as today, assuming that Majority Leader Harry Reid honors his commitment to an open amendment process. That from Congressional Quarterly.
On this vote, the ayes are 170, the nays are 247, less than a majority voting in the affirmative. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 9 printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Richardson, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 9, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Ms. Richardson of California.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen. Recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Laura Richardson of California and another amendment proposed to the bill that would curb federal regulations. This one would allow regulations pursuant to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Another 2-minute vote. The House earlier today passed a resolution condemning the shooting last week in Aurora, Colorado. President Obama talked about that last night in a speech before the National Urban League in New Orleans. The president today has meetings at the White House with his cabinet. Meanwhile, his Republican opponent Mitt Romney continues his European trip today. He's in London. He had meetings earlier with British Prime Minister David Cameron and the Labour leader Ed Miliband, and his week-long trip includes stops in Israel and Poland.
On this vote, the ayes are 173, the nays are 246, less than a majority voting in the affirmative. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 10, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 10, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Mr. Connolly of Virginia.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
The Republican deregulation bill, called the Red Tape Reduction and Small Business Job Creation Act, Democrat Jerry Connolly of Virginia with an amendment that would require Congress to review any presidential request for waiver within 7 days of submission. It's one of many amendment votes here on the House floor.
On this vote, the yeas are 179, the nays are 234, less than a majority voting in the affirmative. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 11, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevail by voice vote. Clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 11, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Mr. Posey of Florida.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
The House working their way through amendments to the deregulation bill. This one by Republican Bill Posey of Florida would require any attorney's fees paid as a result of a federal agency violation of the bill's regulatory moratoria be paid out of the agency's administrative budget. The Associated Press is reporting this morning that Republicans controlling the House are considering punting much of the remaining budget work of Congress to next year. They write that at issue are the annual spending bills funding the day-to-day operations of the government. The September 30th end of the budget year is rapidly approaching, but the appropriations bills are far behind schedule. The AP says that GOP aides say that House Speaker John Boehner supports the idea of a 6-month stopgap spending bill that would pile the stack of unfinished business into the lap of the next Congress and whoever wins the White House in November. That's from the Associated Press this morning. Speaker John Boehner will be talking to reporters momentarily at the Capitol, and while we may not get a chance to show that to you during these votes, you can watch it live as it gets underway here shortly on online at cspan.org.
This vote, the ayes are 244.
Mr. Berman. Mr. Berman votes no. Mr. Lucas. Mr. Lucas votes aye. Mr. Marchant. Mr. Marchant votes aye. Mr. Duffy. Mr. Duffy votes aye. Mr. Luetkemeyer. Off no on aye for Mr. Luetkemeyer.
On this vote, the ayes are 248, the nays are 171, majority voting in the affirmative. The amendment is agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 12, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 12, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Mr. Nadler of New York.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Mike Simpson of Idaho in the Speaker's chair, and calling the votes. The underlying bill would prevent federal agencies from writing or issuing new regulations costing more than $100 million for 2 years, or until the unemployment rate drops to 6% or less. An amendment here by Democrat Jerry Nadler of New York, which would exempt regulations relating to nuclear power plant safety.
The yeas are 175, the nays are 241, less than the majority voting in the affirmative.
Mr. Cooper votes aye. Ms. Kaptur. Ms. Kaptur votes no. Mr. Denham. Mr. Denham votes no.
On this vote, the ayes are 176, the nays are 243, less than a majority voting in the affirmative. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 13, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 13, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Mr. McKinley of West Virginia.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
The threshold on regulations in the deregulation bill is $100 million. David McKinley of West Virginia has an amendment which would modify that, reduce that threshold to $50 million. Halfway through the amendment votes to the deregulation bill on the House floor. Over at the White House today, the President is back after speaking last night to the National Urban League in New Orleans. This is the administration announces today that Secretary Kathleen Sebelius and the Attorney General saying today launching a partnership among the federal government, state officials, and several private health insurance organizations and other health care anti-fraud groups to prevent health care fraud. David Hawkins of Congressional Quarterly with some further details on the President's day today. He writes that there's a cabinet meeting today, but the President will be meeting with Veteran Secretary Eric Shinseki to discuss how to reconcile the coming sequestration or budget cuts with the growing roster of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans seeking benefits. After the cabinet meeting, the President is expected to also meet with Defense Secretary Panetta to talk about Pentagon budget cuts and the situation in Syria.
The 240, the nays are 178. Majority voting in the affirmative, the amendment is agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 15, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentleman from California, Mr. George Miller, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 15, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Mr. George Miller of California.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen. Recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
George Miller, Democrat of California, his amendment would exempt regulations designed to prevent workplace injuries or deaths resulting from the ignition of flammable dust from the definition of significant regulatory action in the bill.
Vote, the ayes are 174, the nays are 239, less than the majority voting in the affirmative. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 16, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentlewoman from California, Mr. Woolsey, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 16, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Ms. Woolsey of California.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen. Recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Flynn Woolsey of California has an amendment which would exempt regulations designed to reduce the number of electrocutions or fatalities resulting from working with high-voltage transmission and distribution lines. 5 more amendment votes to go. We expect a Democratic motion to recommit and then final passage. The Senate is in today. They are continuing consideration of the motion to proceed to cybersecurity legislation, hoping to reach a deal before sometime today. If not, they are expected to hold a cloture vote on Friday. Follow Senate coverage on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. On this vote, the ayes 177, the nays. On this vote, the ayes 170.
Strauss-Lehtinen. Ms. Ross-Lehtinen voted no.
On this vote, the ayes are 178, the nays 236, less than a majority voting affirmative. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 18, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Waters, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. Clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 18, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Ms. Waters of California.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen. Recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Maxine Waters' amendment would authorize sums necessary for the Securities and Exchange Commission to do cost-benefit analysis requirements of the bill. The underlying bill freezes most major federal regulations until for 2 years until the unemployment rate drops to 6% or less. In addition to the regulation freeze, the Associated Press writes that the bill would prevent lame duck administrations from issuing economically significant regulations, would also streamline the issuance of federal construction permits, especially for energy projects that bill sponsors say are delayed by red tape. The AP also writes that the administration, in threatening a veto, said in a statement that the bill would undermine critical public health and safety protections, introduce uncertainty into government decision-making, and interfere with carrying out laws passed by Congress.
171, the nays 247, less than majority voting in the affirmative. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 19, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevail by voice vote. Clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 19, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Mr. Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
This and the remaining 3 amendment votes deal with financial regulations, this one directing the SEC to conduct a cost-benefit analysis of financial reporting requirements imposed by Sarbanes-Oxley on companies with public profiles of $250 million or less. This is a 2-minute vote and 3 more amendments, as I mentioned before that, or after that, rather. And still to come, we expect a Democratic motion to recommit and final passage in what should be the last votes of the week.
The yeas are 251, the nays are 166. The majority voting in the affirmative, the amendment is agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 20, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the ayes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 20, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Mr. Posey of Florida.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen. Recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
On the Republican bill curbing federal regulations, Bill Posey of Florida with an amendment which would bar the Securities and Exchange Commission from issuing or enforcing regulations designed to address climate change. 2 more amendment votes after this, then the Democratic motion to recommit or last chance to change the bill, and final passage expected after that. Earlier today, the House agreed to a resolution condemning the shooting last week in Aurora, Colorado. Congressional Quarterly writes the resolution, which the Senate is expected to take up soon, condemns the shooting and commends the Aurora police and fire departments for, quote, quickly and bravely acting to prevent the additional loss of life. They write the resolution also offers condolences to the families, friends, and loved ones of those killed in the attack and honors the resilience of the community of Aurora.
Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? On this vote, the ayes are 245, the nays are 171. A majority voting in the affirmative, the amendment is agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 21, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentlewoman from New York, Mrs. Maloney, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevail by voice vote. Clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 21, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Mrs. Maloney of New York.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in